Welcome back to Just Law on IQRA TV. I'm your host Ilyas Bulbulia, and I should be with you for the remaining part of this show. Before the show, we were looking at a number of immigration matters, and before we go on to looking at that in greater detail, we'll take our next caller for the day. Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Ji, bhai, ji, thank you for calling. Ji, what's your question?
Yeah, my name is Hamed.
Ji.
I want to know when is the best time to apply for permanent residence.
Okay.
My 5 years residency through surrender sign will finish in 1 year time.
Okay.
That's precisely September 2018.
Right. Okay. Okay. All right.
So when is the best thing to put in for permanent residence?
I understand. There are two things you need to take into account. First of all, the time starts from when you came back into the United Kingdom. So obviously under the Surinder Singh route, you would have lived and worked elsewhere, and then obviously you would have come back to the United Kingdom and you would have been granted a 5-year residence card. So you don't have to wait until the 5-year residence card expires. The actual time starts from when you came back to the United Kingdom. So if I give you an example, you might have come back to the United Kingdom in January of 2012, which would mean that in January 2017, 5 years on, you potentially qualified for indefinite leave under the Surinder Singh route because you've lived here for 5 years. But your residence card might not have been issued in January 2017. Your residence card might have been issued around summer 2017, but you wouldn't have to wait 5 years from when the residence card is issued. You can actually apply from 5 years from coming into the United Kingdom. So that's the first thing to bear in mind. The second thing to bear in mind is that they will want proof now under the revised European regulations from November 2016. They'll want proof that the British citizen has been working in the United Kingdom. So you will need proof which covers a 5-year period as well. So if somebody came back to the United Kingdom in January 2012, started working straight away, then obviously their records would go back to January 2012, and those records would continue hopefully from then on, and after 5 years they would qualify for indefinite leave. But let's say, for example, somebody came into the country but didn't work straight away. They started working 6 months later or a year later. In that situation, although you've lived in the United Kingdom for 5 years, that in itself isn't sufficient. There isn't enough proof that the person has worked in the United Kingdom for 5 years. So it may be that you have to delay your application until you've got not only 5 years residence, but 5 years of employment history as well before you're able to apply. Does that answer your question, or do you want me to?
Yeah, it answered. The first one answered my question quite all right.
Yeah.
Because when I came in, I came with 6 months visa.
Yes.
And even when the 6 months expired, I didn't apply for the residency card.
Sure.
So it's about 2 months after I applied for the residency card.
I understand. Yeah.
So now I can apply based on my first entrance into United Kingdom.
Yes, 100% from your entry, as long as the second part that we discussed. One is the residence. As long as you've lived in the UK for 5 years, you can apply, provided the second requirement is that the employment history, the continuous employment history, is also there for 5 years as well. Okay.
Now, my spouse has not been working, but I have been working since that time I came in. 5 years now. So, will I have to tell her that she should go and start looking for work? Then I will sit at home.
So, how long did she work then, your partner?
She worked at the European country before we came.
Yes, but when she came to the UK, has she worked at all?
No, she has not. I have been the one working she has been taking care of the kids.
This is the problem, to be quite honest. What they will say is that if it's your wife who needs to have been working. If she hasn't been working, what they will say is that, well, if you're working, she is self-sufficient, which is fine, but there needs to have been comprehensive sickness insurance in place for you. And I suspect that wasn't in place because nobody knew about this. There was actually no requirement for this to be in place. What I would do if I was in your situation is hopefully if your wife finds some kind of employment now, make the application anyway to the Home Office. Explain to them you've been here for 5 years, you've been working, although your wife hasn't been working for 5 years. Under the rules in place prior to November 2016, you met the requirements, so there should be some flexibility applied to you. But make the application, let's see what they say. It may be that they reject it on the basis that if your wife hasn't been working and you've been working, there needs to be comprehensive sickness insurance, wasn't in place, therefore they're not prepared to grant it. But there's really nothing to lose by making the application. The application fee is only £65. That's not set to go up at all. So that's all you risk losing, £65. So make the application, make the representations and see what happens.
So under the self-sufficient, the comprehensive insurance,
yeah,
because every 6 months they send us a card,
yeah,
NHS card for our health insurance.
Yeah.
So is that what you mean?
That's not sufficient, no. Because your wife is a British citizen, she doesn't need to have insurance. It's for the spouse, the non-British, the non-European partner. It's for that person that they want private insurance to be taken out. So private insurance are normally provided by companies like AXA. If you go on the internet, there are a whole host of companies that provide sickness health insurance. Typically, the cost is in the region of maybe £100 a month or something in that region. But if your health is okay, it could be something in the region of £50 to £100. But it's that private insurance that they want you to have. The problem is that was not the requirement prior to November 2016, but that has now been introduced, and the way it's been introduced is that you needed that to have been in place from the date you came to the United Kingdom. So you're in some difficulty, but there's no harm in making the application anyway and you know, explaining to them, look, we met the rules as they were prior to November 2006 for people who had come back to the United Kingdom under the Surinder Singh route, and then just wait and see what happens. There's no harm in that. I suspect this very restrictive approach that the Home Office has taken, I suspect that's going to be challenged. There will be case law on that in the near future as well. Thank you very much
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your call. Now, just going back to the matter we were discussing, we looked at the sort of kind of documents that you need to obtain from applicants in their home country when a spouse application is to be made. As I initially explained, all the supporting documents have to be submitted in Sheffield. So there are certain documents that the applicant will have in their home country that you need them to be posted to you in the United Kingdom. The TB certificate, the English certificate, the evidence of marriage, plus there may be some evidence of the relationship, such as the receipt of any funds that have been transferred over to them, such as telephone records, such as correspondence, maybe cards, etc., Eid cards, birthday cards, etc., which you posted to them. All that evidence of contact that they have, ideally that, along with the mandatory documents, should be sent to you in the United Kingdom. To some extent, that's all that's required from the applicant in their home country. The remaining documents are documents which are required from yourself, the sponsor in the United Kingdom. And what I quickly want to do in the last few minutes is run through what a typical sort of application involves. There are really three main aspects of the application. One is being able to demonstrate that the financial requirement is met. The second is to demonstrate that the accommodation requirements are met. And then finally, you have to demonstrate that the relationship is subsisting. In my experience, most applications run into difficulties, or most applications are refused on either the first or the third point. It's where the financial requirements aren't met properly, or where the evidence of the relationship subsisting is insufficient. Very few cases are actually refused because there's a problem with accommodation. The reason for that is the position with accommodation is very easy to satisfy. If you have your own property, you simply submit your deeds confirming that you own the property, and a report demonstrating how large the property is, essentially that there's sufficient space for the applicant to come and live with you. If you don't own the property, again, it's not a problem. Whoever owns the property, maybe your landlord, or if you're living with parents, your parents, they again submit their deeds showing that they own the property, along with proof or confirmation that you can live in the property, and your applicant, when the applicant joins you in the United Kingdom, can live in the United Kingdom, and a report basically confirming there won't be overcrowding. So accommodation is always a straightforward matter. The problem is always, in my experience, either with the income requirement or with the relationship requirement. Now, I don't want to go into the details of the rules today, because we're running out of time, but what I do want to do is flag up certain common problems. So let's look at the relationship requirement. What's the most common problem that you have? Most common problem is that you tend to have is that the sponsor isn't earning 18,600. So what the sponsor's done is they've said, well, look, we've got two jobs. In my main job, I earn £14,000. In my second job, I earn £5,000. Combine them together, and I've got this £19,000 income above the threshold. All well and good. You get the wage slips in, get the bank statements in, get the employment letters in as well, and it's all hunky-dory, it's all fine. The problem is that when that application is submitted, as I said before, the visa officers in Sheffield will, now that they're here, pick that application up and make a call to the sponsor, make a call to the employer, and ask about the employment. They have certain set questions that they ask, and what I find with clients is that it's the same 30-40 questions which are being asked regularly, and you'd be surprised, even though we know what the questions are, you'd be surprised how many applications are refused. Because what the sponsor doesn't know enough about the job, sponsor gets the answers wrong, or the employer isn't really on the ball and doesn't know how to answer the questions, or takes the matter too lightly, busy doing something else, and doesn't answer the questions properly. So the key thing here with the financial requirement, especially when there is a second job that's been shown to meet the requirement, is you need to be aware that the Home Office from Sheffield will make that phone call. So that's the biggest problem with the financial requirement at the moment, in meeting the financial requirement. Right. Because we're running out of time, let's look at the relationship requirement. What's the biggest problem there? In my experience, the biggest problem is this, that the parties have got married, they've been married for over a year, the application is about to be submitted, and the sponsor in the UK hasn't returned back to the home country to see the applicant in the applicant's home country. So they've been married for a year, they may have some telephone contact, they may have fantastic WhatsApp contact, but the sponsor hasn't gone back to see the applicant. Now, in my experience, the view that the Home Office is taking here is, if it's been a year, and if you're saying that the marriage is subsisting, surely the sponsor and the applicant would have met in that year. If they're married, they're together, and they should surely meet at least once in that year. So when I normally see these cases, I do say to applicants that, look, whatever it's going to cost you, do go back, don't wait for the visa to be granted, because what they normally say is, well, look, the visa is going to be granted anyway, what's the point of me incurring additional costs? I've got, enough to pay out in terms of fees, etc. So why should I go back? But we always say, go back, because that's the main reason why the applications are rejected. So So that's where you are. Unfortunately, today we can't go into the rules in greater detail. Inshallah, we'll do that next week. We should be back on air next week on Monday at 6 o'clock. We'll look at these matters in greater detail then. Until then, Assalamu alaikum.